So welcome everybody to session 3 on mindfulness of thoughts. I'm calling this one the yoke of attachment. And we'll be exploring the notion of attachment and what it is and how some of the ways that we can practice with our attachments. And again, I'll be pointing out a little twist on this practice, and perhaps one of the biggest impediments is that we're often so attached to our attachments that we don't actually want to let them go. And this is, this is why we don't. So that's a key part of what I'll be exploring today as well. So our thoughts, we've been exploring thoughts, and our thoughts really weave this complex of belief systems that support our attachments. And most human beings never kind of examine what their attachments are. And even for people that do take that exploration to heart, perhaps because they're long-standing Dharma practitioners, many of the attachments remain hidden for decades. So they're actually quite hard to identify. That's what we'll be exploring, a piece of that. So a key to this is kind of laying bare and seeing what our beliefs are, what our belief structures are that support and perpetuate our attachments. So all of these belief structures can be directly observed and investigated. So we're bringing that curiosity to it. Again, so there's no resistance. We're moving, this practice is all about moving from resistance and judgment to acceptance and investigation or curiosity, exploration. It's really the basis for every practice that I share with you has that as its key basis, and it's necessary to emphasize it, in particular when we're looking at attachments, because there can be a real deep resistance to exploring our attachments. So, what are attachments? In the past, I've used the word identification. If that gives you a clue kind of to what I'm talking about, but I find attachments are perhaps even a little deeper than that. They're actually are kind of core beliefs, often based on Papanca that we explored last week, conceptual proliferation. So attachments are these kind of core beliefs that have solidified as truth in our minds. They're solidified as truth. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs actually from a book called The Mind and the Way by John Sumedo, if you can see that. And it's just in the introduction on page 9. The Buddhist practice is to abide in pure mindfulness, in which there is what we call insight knowing or direct knowledge. It is a knowledge that isn't based on perception, an idea, a position, or a doctrine. And this knowledge can only be possible through mindfulness. What we mean by mindfulness is the ability to not attach to any object, either in the material realm or the mental realm. When there is no attachment, the mind is in its pure state of awareness, intelligence, and clarity. This is mindfulness. The mind is pure and receptive, sensitive to existing conditions. It is no longer a conditioned mind that just reacts to pleasure and pain, praise and blame, happiness and suffering. For example, if you get angry right now, you can follow the anger. you can believe it and go on and on creating that particular emotion. Or you might suppress the anger and try to stop it out of fear or aversion. However, instead of doing either, you can reflect on the anger as something observable. Now, if anger were our true self, we wouldn't be able to observe it. That is what I mean by reflection. What is it that can observe and reflect on the feeling of anger? What is it that can watch and investigate the feeling, the heat in the body, or the mental state? That which observes and investigates is what we call a reflective mind. The human mind is a reflective mind. So Ajahn, they're talking about how to use a reflective mind to investigate our attachments. We can observe and reflect on the thoughts or beliefs that are feeding and supporting our attachments. So the underlying belief, you kind of trace it all back to some underlying beliefs, is that without, so it kind of goes in two directions here. It's one is that without some person or thing in my life, I can never be happy or content. And the opposite of that is aversion. As long as that person or thing is in my life, I can never be happy or content. And you can fill in the blanks and that you can start to just think to yourself, oh, where do I have such core beliefs? Is there a thing or a person in my life that I would never be happy or content without? That I have that belief? Or is there the belief that as long as this person or thing is in my life, that I can't be happy? So you can really kind of just reflect on that question in the mind, but where the practice really flourishes is when you ask these questions during your day, when you're noticing attachments arising. So, well, you can get an idea what the aversion-based attachment feels like. Perhaps think of your least favorite person in the world or your least favorite food. Those are two strong areas where we have attachments, and you can just to get a feel for what the aversion-based attachment feels like. Let's reflect on just thinking about your least favorite person or food. So what I want to really concentrate on today, and hopefully I haven't put too much on the agenda here. I think I may have, but because I'm looking at the the notes here and I'm thinking, oh, it's a lot to cover, but we'll see how far we get. It's kind of 5 phases that I've noticed in my practice that I've gone through in practicing with attachment. And it really is practicing with attachment. It's a practice. It's an engagement with this observable phenomenon that I'm calling attachment. These beliefs that then support this wanting and not wanting, attaching and not attaching, or pushing away, I should say. So the first one is just to open and observe and see the thoughts, the beliefs that maintain and perpetuate the particular attachment, and seeing this with clarity. So when an attachment arises, you can say, okay, what's the thought? What's the belief? What's the core belief here? Core belief is presenting itself as a thought structure that's maintaining this attachment. The second is see that you do not actually want to escape the suffering that's flowing from this attachment. Deep down, you really do not want to escape it. Because of, and I'll talk more about this, there's a deep fear of what your life may be like without that thing to which you're attached, that thing or person. So really, that for me, this was a crucial one, is sort of coming to the realization that, yeah, I'm not letting go of this attachment because I don't want to. It's just something that there's just too much fear that's holding it in place. So that was a big aha for me. And then being able to then trace that to the actual fear that was underneath it. Seeing that the thoughts, the beliefs are not true. And I've talked about this many times in this Sangha. Thoughts are not facts, is another way that I've put it. So I won't talk about that too much. And seeing what fuels our attachments. So, we have this belief structure, but then there's some often emotions that arise that feed the attachment more. Mental proliferation may surface, so more thoughts about it that kind of circle around and support it. It takes the form of blaming or righteous indignation or all kinds of different kinds of thought patterns. And then 5, when all of these above are seen, these 4, what actually happens is we naturally let go of the belief support structure and allow the fear of losing this kind of identity or thing that we're attached to so we lose the attachment to it. It just kind of naturally dissolves and fades. It's not something we get rid of in any way. And when we gradually, and it is a gradual process, I would say, at this level of practice, we gradually see through and experience our attachments. The freedom naturally arises. The silent joy of being is what's left with non-attachment. When one is in a state of non-attachment, one is in a state of unity, not separation, and silent joy simply arises. So I use the word yoke here. The Buddha used the analogy of a yoke often, I find, in the suttas. And it was a common implement in his era when farming was done and hauling things were done by animals. And they'd often be yoked together, right, with this thing around the wood. I don't know if you've ever seen those wood structures that go around their necks and they kind of keep two in line together. That's called a yoke. And the Buddha talked about how, he was asked a question. He said, do we suffer because we're really sensitive human beings, that we just have these sense organs that are so sensitive to the world is that why we suffer? Or do we suffer because there's just all these sense objects out there that are so, they're so pleasurable or they're just so displeasurable? Like, which is it? Is it us with these senses that we have, or is it all these things that are out there that just capture us? And the Buddha used I said it's neither. It's the yoke that holds them together, that keeps you attached. I thought, that's that's why I call this the yoke of attachment. So it's the yoke that keeps us are attached to, and it also denotes in his era a form of enslavement. It had that connotation too. So that's why I kind of use this word yoke. So we're really seeing how, we have these sense organs. The Buddha added the mind as one, as a sixth sense organ. And then all these things that we either want more of or less than. So we attach to them either through that grasping or the attaching. Attachment can also take the form of, I can't be happy unless I get rid of that, get rid of that person or that thing. So it's really seeing how we're yoked in this way or attached. So let's go through, see how much we get through this with step by step. I hope I'm not speeding through this too much. I'm giving you a flavor for what attachment is. And the number one thing that we can do is see the thoughts and beliefs that maintain and perpetuate the attachment. Because that's really where it's arising. It's supported by a thought. There's an author, a Zen teacher, Ezra Baida, who speaks a lot about attachment. And I had got some insights from studying with him. And another one is who I've read is Anthony DeMello, the priest, whose book I always have kicking around. It's almost a copy in every house. There's one right here, The Way to Love. And he also has another book. I can't remember the name of it, but he has all these chapters about attachment. And he's looking at it from a Christian perspective, and it sounds very similar to what the Buddha was saying as well. We have to honestly see the beliefs that maintain the attachment. Honestly see the thoughts that are maintaining it. So take a person that you're close to. Maybe not your children, because the children are most likely, for myself and for me, I think most people that I've worked with, is kind of the last attachment that they see how the suffering that gets created through it. Take a person that you're close to. You may see that you have a belief that your own emotional well-being is dependent on having this person in your life. That you can only be happy if this person's in your life. And you may also have a belief that, well, this person needs to be a certain way for me to be happy. So they must be in my life, and they must be this way for me to be happy. Really look deeply at that. So when we hold people in ways, these kind of ways, we can call that attachment. And we really can't truly love when we're in relationship through attachment in this way. So just kind of looking at the thought structures, the beliefs that might support those kinds of attachments. You find the attachments all through your life, food, all kinds of pleasurable experiences, comfort, accomplishments, occupations, where we live, the car we drive. It goes on, so on and on and on. So there's lots to explore in this practice. So remember here that I want to say a little bit about what we're not talking about as well, because sometimes people say, well, these things are important to me in some way. So it's important to see where there's attachment. And it's also important to see that where there's an actual demand that things be in a certain way for me to be happy, right? There's the demand that things be in a particular way, or I just can't be content. So it's that demand. We still have preferences, right? We can have preferences. I've often told the story of, somebody asks you your favorite ice cream. You'll give them an answer, but you might not be so attached to that answer that you believe that you can't be happy unless you have that particular flavor of ice cream. Although I've seen people that actually get quite I shouldn't say that you don't. I don't have. I never had that kind of attack. But as I said, a few people popped into my mind that I think are actually attached to Rocky Road. I think that's what it's called, ice cream. That it could be a demand that is emotional. But for the most part, we have, it's a preference for a flavor, that it's not a demand that, that we see that we have to be happy. That's how we kind of, if you can hold all your preferences in that same way. So, this person's, I like this person. I really have a preference for having them in my life, and I enjoy their company, and I'll call them, and I'll make an effort to connect with them, and so on. That's holding that relationship in the way of a preference. It's held much lighter than an attachment, which is has a feeling of a demand. Your health is a good example. You have a preference for good health, right? And you do what you can to maintain your good health. The preference for good health doesn't cause suffering. But if it's a demand that your life should be a particular way or shouldn't be this way in order for you to be content, then suffering will arise. I hope you're getting a feel for kind of what I'm saying here, and how you can, I'm giving you a lot of your intellectual mind, in a way to grasp this, but really it needs to come down to the heart as a practice. I thought I'd just put that out there, because often the egoic mind goes, "Oh, wait a minute, this is how I'm viewing it," and so that just gives a little bit more clarity in that regard. So just seeing that attachments arise from thoughts, from beliefs. And as I said, this is something that Ezra really taught me. Physical pain, one that I was working with at the time, is another opportunity to look at beliefs that support and maintain attachment to comfort. I was very attached to comfort. I had the belief that I should be free of pain. And with this pain, I cannot be happy. That was a core belief that was causing a lot of suffering. This is too much, and so on. But as I looked deeply, I saw that there's a belief there that I couldn't be happy while experiencing discomfort. It was just a belief that was maintaining the suffering. It's attachment to comfort. But so I eventually came to realize, I discovered, just exploring this, opening to it, that I can be happy and in pain at the same time. In fact, I was causing more pain through my attachment to comfort than what the pain itself was causing. The Buddha's second arrow story. You get the first arrow that hurts, and then you shoot a second arrow into the same spot. That's what I was doing. So and in recognizing that this belief structure and attachment was behind this more suffering, the physical pain could actually dissolve over time and quite substantially. So I really began to see that as long as I was attached to physical comfort, that I would be angry, resentful, and in considerably more pain. So I hope that story resonates in some way for people to give a taste of how one can go about exploring this in your own life, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, or whatever the case may be. So we really begin to see the belief. That's the basis of it. I cannot be happy unless. And we also begin to see how strongly we hold on to them. How strongly we hold on to them and just simply do not want to let them go. And this if you hear anything that I'm saying, I think you're all hearing, I shouldn't say that, but if you what's the word? If you, when I say hear, I mean, if you grok, if you really internalize one thing, that would be it, is we simply do not want to let go of our attachments. And that's why they maintain. We simply do not. And I think, and one ego arguing with another ego is not going to get rid of them. The only way to get rid of them is through your own deep and honest exploration. And I think at the same time, a deep aspiration for freedom and for truth. So that's the second one, is we do not actually want to escape our attachments. And we simply hold on to them very strongly. We do not want to let them go. And it's important to see that as human beings, we prefer our attachments over freedom and truth. That's really why I wanted to give this talk. It really struck me how we as human beings we don't want to give up our attachments. And that's why I'm using the word attachments, because it's got that bite to it. We prefer our attachments over freedom. We'll let go a little, right? It brings a little peace. When we're talking about total, seeing all our attachments in their totality and how they cause suffering, we really don't. We want to hang on to the ones that we think are actually perhaps even helping us. But it's not so much based on us thinking that it's helping us, although there's an element of that. It's based on a deep-seated fear of what might happen if we let go of them. That's really what it's based on. If I let go of my attachment to money, I won't have any and I'll be poor. It's that kind of, if I let go of my attachment to X, then there's a deep-seated fear of what, if I let go of my attachment to control, here's a big one I also had to work through. If I let go of my attachment to control, my life will be chaos. It'll be unfurled, just chaos will rain down on the household, and all the shit will hit the fan multiple times every minute, and it'll just be hopeless. So and that was the deep-seated fear. And didn't want to let go of my attachment to control, because the fear of what would happen if I did was quite strong. So we really have to see what those fears are. Look deeply and see what they are. You know, if what I'm saying is not true, that we actually do want to let go of our attachments, then we would have a long time ago. I wouldn't even be given this talk. Everybody would have, oh, geez, that attachment, look at the suffering it causes. I'm letting go of that one. They would just be going out the window, like flying off the shelf. Oof, that attachment's gone. Suffering, look at that. Oof, gone. Look at the thought and emotional turmoil that one's causing. Oof, gone. But the fear overrides all that. All that seeing. The egoic mind is deeply afraid of letting go of attachments. The only thing it's more afraid of is its own non-existence, which is kind of the last attachment that you let go of, is the egoic mind's attachment to itself. So it's just looking at deeply at these fears. It seems we're terrified of the unknown in that regard. Well, we got through 2 of them. It's not bad. But I think I'll stop there. I'm just looking down. I got right into this topic. I don't know. I sat down at the computer and my hands were just flying on the keyboard, and I've got pages and pages here of just like bullet points, never mind notes. And sometimes that happens. Yeah, but I won't. And I used to try to give it all in one talk, but I've gotten a little better at this, I guess, and I stopped myself. I'm not attached to having to give the whole talk. I will be happy if I give a third of the talk. So I'll open it up for any questions or comments, or whatever is on your minds, really, in terms of your practice as well. But you can't ask any questions about 3, 4, and 5 on the list. That's to be about 1 or 2. No, I'm just kidding. You can ask whatever you want.
I just had a comment. This is a fascinating topic, Stephen. Thanks. But I just had a comment. It's about I've done a lot of study on attachment theory. So the attachment theory is, for those of people that don't know, it's the study of relationships, like during childhood development, your relationship with your primary caregiver. It's usually the mother, in most cases, but it can be another person. And I'm just thinking, and it's big that, I mean, having a healthy attachment to your primary caregiver really, determines so much, how much you're going to thrive later in life. The thinking is that, as more and more it's being found that this is the source of a lot of problems when there's kind of disordered attachment, and there's a whole bunch of different disordered attachment styles, they call it. And I'm thinking about, how does this apply to this attachment we're talking about here? And the way I see it is, in order for the ideal attachment to happen, you know, there has to be like this kind of like this loving presence that the primary caregiver has to give to the child. And it's through that modeling, I feel, that the child is able to actually actually come to know their own true nature. If they have an unconditionally loving parent who's really in it for the child and not kind of, you know, mostly in it for themselves for whatever reason, that's due to causes and conditions anyways, it's not their fault. And I think about that, it's like, well, yeah, they're discovering their own true nature. It's kind of like what we're doing by examining our own attachments. Just once you can let go of all those attachments, then you're left with your true nature. And it's interesting how, you know, we say we got to be attached to, you have to be healthy, you have to have a healthy attachment to our caregivers, and we think of attachment as being like this, maybe not the best thing. Like attachment is bad, you know, not bad, but attachment can get in the way of discovering your true nature, your true essence. But in terms of this attachment theory and our development as children, healthy attachment actually fosters non-attachment. So it's interesting. Like, so the healthy attachment to that primary caregiver, you know, I think there's able to kind of have a non-attachment to later on to you know, yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's just having that healthy attachment, you're more able to just let go of things. So it's definitely, there's a lot of connections between these two, the Buddhist attachments and the psychology attachment theory. I'm gonna have to sit down and write some of these things out and meditate on them.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody expound it in the way you did, relating attachment theory to Buddhist attachment teachings. But you know, I've heard people talk about it in terms of self. Right, in childhood, we need to really develop a sense of self, an egoic self, self-esteem, right? In order to then in later life see the illusion of the self. So if you have a lot of attachment issues, take it back to attachment issues, you may also have a lot of fears because you don't have a stable base from which to engage with other people, and particularly other people in the world. So it could be a real barrier to being able to explore one's attachments later in life. Yeah. Yeah. So I always say, you know, we develop really good egos, you know, so never take that away from a child. If you have young children, they've got to develop that ego and that sense of self. I mean, the moment they recognize them, they see that, oh, there is a moment when they look in a mirror and say, oh, there's a me here. From that moment on, for quite some years, they've got to develop a sense of this egoic place in this world that they're imagining in order to function, right? And then that kind of non-dysfunctional functioning, if that's even a way to put it, allows them to explore their true nature, as you put it. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. So I was thinking about myself, obviously, and I feel, aside from my children, as you had mentioned, I don't believe that I have any attachments, any earthly attachments. However, in terms of aversion, I was just writing down in my notes, I believe I'm attached at this moment to detaching, if that makes any sense, to detaching from this, whatever's the thoughts that float around in my head, which I've talked about for the past year. So I feel like in my mind, or whatever it is, I feel like I've run this marathon all my life, let go of the attachments along the way. I'm lighter, I'm lighter, I'm lighter, I'm lighter. And I feel like I'm right at the finish line, like I can just see it. But if I can only clear everything in my mind, then I'll be good. If I can only just prove once and for all that I'm a good person, and in order to do that, just redeem myself, kind of like maybe this, I'm not an alcoholic, but I suppose a 12-step program, part of it is going back to everyone in your life that you've ever hurt or done wrong to, or if that's done wrong. And I feel like that's where I'm at, that I'm in such a peaceful place, as we've talked about last week. Is it Papanca, right? Yes. And so I just feel like it's so close, but something, the ego, I guess, prevents me from just crossing over. If there is even is a crossing over, I feel like in my brain, there's an action that I need to take. And in order to cross the line, it's like, there's a show on Netflix called The Good Place and the Bad Place, and they count your points. And to get to the good place, you have to have a certain amount of points. So I'm just like, well, if I can just only redeem myself, then I'll be ready and everything will be great. But until then, I'm just going to keep on thinking about it and ruminating. And then I'm attached to the idea of not ruminating, and that makes me want to ruminate even more. And you had asked us last week to notice what happens with Papanca. And for me, I noticed that if I'm in a peaceful place and then Papanca shows up, then I have Papanca about Papanca, then I'm like, okay, stop, go away. So anyway, I believe, if there's anything that I'm attached to, is the attachment to wanting to detach. And until that happens, I won't be free and I won't be released. It's just, yeah. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there can be an element of being attached to wanting to be a good person, or the image that we think a good person is. The Good Place the show The Good Place kind of epitomizes that, right? Especially when the people that accidentally get in,
Yeah.
they're really bad people. They didn't earn any points, and there's a computer glitch or something, and they got in. It's quite a show. Yeah, I like watching that one on airplanes, because I laugh my head off at that one. And but so there can be an attachment to this, our image of what it is to be a good person. You might want to explore that a little bit. And of course, there can be a deep attachment in spiritual practice to being a good yogi, an attachment to the seeker, to the seeking for freedom, and an idea, attachment to the belief structure that there's something that we need to do to redeem ourselves, or something that we need to do in any direction to realize truth. That's a huge impediment, and that's one of the last impediments that go, right, is letting go of the seeker. But it's a big one, because when the ego lets go of that, There's not much left because it's invested now everything into spiritual seeking, because it's willing to let go of a lot of stuff. And the words aren't capturing it here, but once think about what's left for the ego when spiritual seeking is let go of. What's left? It's kind of the last. There's nothing when the ego runs out of things to attach to. All that's left is no ego, no self, and no separation. Right? So you can see why it's a hard one to hard for the ego to let go of that one, because it's its own demise. It's the biggest fear of the ego is its non-existence, which the Buddha pointed out many times. Non-being, non-becoming, biggest fear. Yeah. So it's the fear, like I'll say from my experience, the last fear that kind of gets recognized. But we don't do anything to recognize it, because that's just more seeking. You're really at the stage now of non-doing, like just letting go of any sense of I need to do this, I need to do that, and just let go into the flow of life as it is, moment by moment.
Yeah. And health as well. Health. You talked about health. That's one lingering thing for me as well. But other than that, yeah, the non-doing. But I was about to say I'm working on it. I'm working on not doing. I'm working on not working on it. It's a hard one, but thank you.
Yeah. It's just allowing life to unfold as it is, including the thought that you need to do anything is just a thought, that you need to do something, just a thought. Doesn't mean you have to follow it or do anything. Yeah. And you mentioned children. Children's is a strong attachment that we and it's the egoic mind will never be able to think why that would be a source of suffering. But once you start to really explore it, you can really see how there is a lot of suffering in our attachment. The demand that our children must be in our lives and must be a certain way is a source of a lot of suffering for us. And we can really see that. I went through a phase where I was really attached to my son's sporting success. In soccer, I was his coach, and boy, I was really, when he had a good game, I felt good. When he had a bad game, I felt crappy. And when he, missed, it was right down to like the nuances of the dribble of how he was handling the ball in the field and so on. So it was decades ago in my life. He's getting late into his 30s now, but it was a real kind of deep seeing for me to eventually see. And I had to give up coaching, to step back and say, okay, and to be able to kind of reflect, bring up the reflective mind, as that Ajahn Sumedho talked about, and see with some clarity that I was attached to my son in that way. He had to be a certain way for me to be happy. Yeah. So that we can deeply look at that one, that our attachment to our loved ones as well.
Thank
And
you.
I invite you to explore that in your own life.
I just wanted to add something, Nuwana, that one of my one of my favorite psychologists of all time, Carl Jung. I think one of his best quotes that sums up pretty much all of his work is, and this is, he said this himself, about himself. He said, I'd rather be whole than be good. So that's I just thought of that now with you, is this striving to, like, do the right thing and, be a good person and things. And yeah, Jung was big on looking at, like, the shadow, getting down to the shadow, and like befriending those parts of yourself that you can essentially know the parts of yourself that you don't like, because you just look around and see what you don't like in other people.
Yeah.
So, and that's so it's kind of realizing that we're all whole. We all have all of these things, all of these different characteristics within us, savory and the unsavory. Yeah. And then that's the way, that's the nature of reality, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason.
Anybody else have any attachments they want to share with the group? That's always a good one. Good question. We all have so many that, yeah.
I just have a comment about what Jason said earlier on, sorry, about the attachment theory. Because I suppose my parenting style from when my kids were babies, which my oldest daughter is 18 now, I discovered later on was called attachment parenting. I didn't know. My kids are next level independent. I mean, they were kind of like, I took them to school and they're like, why are you still here? That kind of thing. So I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I think attachment in that case is more connection versus this kind of attachment, which is more clinging. I think it's phonetics, right? So I think the connotation is maybe slightly different. If you're very attachment of a child is being connected to the child in the way that they feel constantly supported, but it's not a clinging. And people used to criticize me and say, your kids are just going to be, they're too attached to you, but they were always with me when they were younger and I was very attentive to them, but we were connected, much like, a tree's roots spread out and nourish the plants around it. So anyway, I was just thinking about, maybe it's just phonetics in this case, because I don't think it's the same kind of attachment that Stephen is talking about, which is more clinging. This is more connection. So anyway, that was just my 2 cents, because yeah.
Yeah, well put. It's a bonding, connecting rather than clinging. Yeah. And the fact that you were bonded with your children allows them to say bye when they get to be young adults. Right? It's hard for the parent because they're still bonding with the child. It's like, you did your job and now I'm, moving on, right? I find that in cases where there wasn't that kind of deep bonding, the children really need to continue to cling, because they're trying to, maybe I'll get this when I'm 60. I'll get this with my 95-year-old parent. Maybe I'll finally get that bonding that I didn't get as a child, and that it can go on right through adulthood. Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. Thank you.
Gabor Mate, he's a addiction specialist in BC. People may have heard of him. He's really, he's written a few books. His line on that is you need to breed dependency in childhood in order to allow for dependency, in order to develop independency later on in life. You actually need the dependency. You need to allow that dependency to just like be like uninhibited when they're kids, and then, you know, paradoxically, it's not really paradoxically, but all of a sudden they're independent.
Yeah, and then we cry, but that's life. Yeah. Well, thank you, folks. So I am going to be away again, seeing my daughter in the East Coast, but this time I won't be able to offer the sessions remotely from the East Coast because of, well, my daughter and her partner bought a house. And I say they bought a house 6 minutes from the middle of nowhere. So, because it's 6 minutes from Sackville, which I keep kind of looking at it as the middle of nowhere, Sackville, New Brunswick. So they have internet, so I'll be able to get emails and respond to emails with people if you have some, you know, a question or something you want to communicate. But I won't have the bandwidth for Zoom. Not enough to at least deliver it. I could be a recipient perhaps, but as Christina says, when she does her meetings, she's mostly a black square, just listening to voice. So yeah, so that's but the good news is Awana and Jason will be facilitating, and Jason will be so Awana's going to facilitate next week. Jason's going to give a talk and a guided meditation the next week, June 9th, I believe it is, and then June 16th. It's up in the air. Either way, either format might work. But I've got a really interesting talk lined up for next week by Joseph Goldstein on thoughts, and he really has some deep insights. It's an interview with him on thoughts, and then a very interesting guided meditation by Mark Nunberg on relating to thoughts as well. So I'll miss you folks, but life is the way it goes. Yeah.
We'll miss you too, Stephen. Have fun at your daughter's.
Well, happy move to you, to your daughters and you as well.
Yeah, I think she's going to have me doing yard work and renovations. So she keeps telling me, "Oh, don't forget this tool." I go, "Well, what do I need my tile cutter? Am I going to be doing tile?" Oh, it'll be fun.
I was going to say, I'm not that attached to you, Stephen, so it's okay.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, there you go. Do not want to be attached to your teachers. There's actually a lot of wisdom in that statement, Terry. Yeah.
Well, I stumbled across it if there is.
Yeah, well, that's how we get all our wisdom. Yeah. Okay, so take care, everybody, and be well. And Suzanne, I hope you get. It's getting dark.
Oh,
I hope
yes, it's dark. It's time for me to get the flashlight and go to bed.
Yeah, I hope your hydro comes on soon. I really do.
Thank you. Have a good trip, Stephen. And thanks, everybody. You all contribute so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I really needed it tonight, too.
Oh, awesome. We'll see you again. Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Bye, everyone.
Stephen, everybody.
Travel, Stephen.
See you
Bye.
next
Good seeing you.
Ciao.
Mm.